So in this series of films, I'm going to just show the whole process from start to finish of glazing, well, gridding up and then drawing and then painting the grisaille and glazing a portrait. And for this, I thought I'd use a painting by William Bouguereau, and it's called After the Bath, but I'm just going to focus on the head because actually I could just see that I've often wondered how he's done his glazing, and I think I don't know, we'll see, but I think I've worked it out over a grisaille. I mean, he painted different paintings in various ways, but I think his primary method was working over a grisaille underpainting. So anyway, I'm just going to show the whole process. So it just demonstrates what I might do if I was doing a portrait, a commission, or any kind of portrait in using the grisaille process. So as I said, I'll grid it, and I'll talk about the various tools that I might use, like my iPad, etc. So as I said, it's based on here's the full painting, and it's called After the Bath by William Bouguereau. So whatever you think of his work, I just thought it was quite an instructive exercise. It could be in the glazing technique. So let's see how it goes. So here's the little edited portrait that I've cropped. I got this image from WikiArt, and unfortunately it was the largest resolution image I could find, and it's not that big, but it should be enough. Ideally you'd want to use something with as large a file as possible so that you can get a sense of the details, but I think just for the purposes of this exercise it should be fine. So what I did is, as I said, I cropped it, and it ended up being 320 pixels across by 400 pixels down. And so I thought that was kind of a good guideline and should be roughly around actual size if I just translate each pixel into a millimeter. So I've made a board and I've primed it in just an acrylic primer, white acrylic primer. And I usually do this vertically with a large brush and then horizontally, or either vice versa. And so it just creates a sort of crosshatch effect. And so that's primed and sealed, and it's 320mm by 400mm. So it's important to know the exact dimensions of the image so that they correspond when I begin to grid up, and I'll show that in a second. And I'll put the image as I've used it on my website, mattharveyart.com. So if you want, you can take it, save it, and try the same exercise. So as I said, I'm not necessarily interested in the subject so much, but I just thought I've often really admired Bouguereau's the glazing technique just alone, and it's got just a beautiful translucent quality, and no one really knew how he did it. I've seen some photos where glazes have actually sort of started peeling off some of his works, so that definitely provides a very big clue as to how he went about creating his sort of cool shadow tones. And the glazes have just a really wonderful liquid quality to them. You can see, looking closely, there are greens and reds. I think cadmium red, vermilion. Green, I mean, I guess I'll be using sap green to try and sort of mix up the colours. Her neck is that's going to be a mixture of a sort of red and a green. There's a sort of rose madder in her lips. The depth of her hair has been created through just a few glazes of quite rich blacks, probably ivory black mixed with alizarin crimson or something like that. But the point is, it's just all going to provide just some really good examples and challenges in recreation to just see if I can learn something about how Bouguereau did create that painting. So however he painted it, and no one can say for sure. I suppose you could do if you x-rayed it or something, but I'm convinced it's done by glazing, and I'm also sure that it would just be very, very valuable to just have a go and try and recreate the painting to a degree, just using the glazing technique over a grisaille underpainting. So the first stage for me, if I'm working from a reference like a photo, is to then put it on my iPad, and I use a little app called Grid Hash, catchily titled, and it's really handy because it's got I think about 3 different grids that you can use. But basically, as a rule, a way I found that works very well for me is to divide horizontally and vertically by 4. So I split it down the middle and then half again and again. So I just go in the program that you can use 3 different grids, and definitely they shouldn't be movable. But the first grid I make, it's just it's divided by 4 across the horizontal axis, and then 4 by the vertical, and usually just like a pixel wide or sometimes 2 pixels wide. But as I said, this is quite a poor quality image. It's not a very high resolution, but it will do. So I just do that so that I can get a rough outline of some of the proportions that might be sort of easier to draw, and then I home in on just the area of the face where I need a little bit more detail. So when I've done the first grid, the white grid, then I can look at just making a second grid, and then I'll just divide the canvas by 24 by 24. So it's really very straightforward, and then I'm just using a different colour so I can see it. And this grid is for the detail, so it's just the detail of the face. And actually on the board I'm only going to draw in just the middle 4 squares, so you can see that the face is actually held in, it's not even just the middle 4 squares, it's sort of the lower 2 of those. There's just 2 squares where the real detail of the face is held in this sort of grid. So, but I will do the 4 squares because obviously the ears there, and the rest of it I'll just sort of judge by eye. I might even use a ruler if I want to just check, but you can draw as many of the finer grid as you want, but that works fine for me. So usually when I'm doing a portrait, because it's easier to judge and there's less at stake, you can just use the larger grid to do, say, neck, shoulders, or other parts of the composition where detail isn't such a focus. For me, it's okay just to have the larger grid. Hence why I have the 2 grids, so that I just know the bits that I really want to home in on. I can just do a mini grid within the larger grid. And so here's the one that I've drawn on the board that I'm going to use. So there you have it. I've just you can see same grid, but I've just done the smaller grid for the fine details just within these 4 middle squares. And you can see that I'm using just coloured crayon to do it, and I use 2 different colours. I use sort of reds, oranges, browns, things like that, because they just don't necessarily, they won't show through so much. I'd really advise against using something like a biro. You could use a pencil, but it shows through more. I think crayons for me are the best. I learned that from watching Ben Lustenhauer's videos and looking at his blog. He just recommended using like a red crayon or something like that, simply because it doesn't show through so much. So that's how I would begin preparing to do a portrait using a grid method, and I'll show the drawing in the next video.